Hello and welcome to the Signal Sitdown. I'm your host, Bradley Devlin. You may have heard of deaths of despair. It's a term that's really been in vogue since the COVID-19 pandemic, naturally because the isolation of the COVID-19 regime caused these deaths to skyrocket. The term deaths of despair is an umbrella term that covers a number of causes of death: suicide, drug overdose, alcohol-related diseases. And those deaths can be attributed or linked to despair caused by social alienation, economic hopelessness, and a loss of purpose. You or someone you know has probably had firsthand experience dealing with one of these deaths of despair, and it's a story far too common today in America. And let's talk about those deaths of despair because they are leading causes of deaths for Americans aged 18 to 45. For Americans aged 18 to 45, the leading cause of death is fentanyl overdose. Fentanyl is responsible for an outright majority of the drug overdose deaths that occur in the United States every year. And there are a lot of them. Over the 2-year period of 2023 and 2024, nearly 200,000 Americans died of drug overdoses. But many times these Americans don't just go straight for the fentanyl, obviously. Usually they get hooked on another drug first. Sometimes cocaine, sometimes another kind of drug, but a lot of times it's prescription opiates. It could be their prescription, their parents or their grandparents, or the prescription of a friend or their friend's family. And they get hooked. And once they're hooked, it's incredibly difficult to get off. Drug use becomes habitual, riskier, and ends in tragedy. The second leading cause of death for this age demographic is suicide, another one of those deaths of despair. Over 20,000 Americans aged 18 to 44 committed suicide in 2023 alone. In a 2-decade span, the suicide rate has increased by over 30%. And that's especially true for men. The suicide rate for men is consistently about 3 to 4 times higher than it is for women. How did we get here? Now, some people like to point the finger at COVID, and certainly COVID's isolation, the shuttering of normal social life, job losses, and ruptures to schooling and rites of passage poured gasoline on the fire. But as the suicide statistics over the past 2 decades show, that fire was already raging. COVID wasn't an accelerant. It was a microcosm of all the forces that have been building in this country for decades. It was not the origin of the crisis. Maybe, just maybe, it's because we've taught an entire generation of Americans to hate themselves by virtue of their birth. First, their birth as an American citizen, because America is an evil country that killed the natives and has since been responsible for oppressing the world. If America's existence is inherently unjust, what does that mean for the inherent value of individual Americans? Of course, we've also taught a generation of Americans to hate themselves by virtue of their skin color or some other immutable characteristic. The biggest victims of this self-hating and, yes, often violent ideology are young men who, again, are disproportionately represented in all those deaths of despair mentioned earlier. There's a growing sense among many young men that the society around them does not merely challenge certain masculine norms. Doug Emhoff is a real man. Look at Tim Walz. No, rather it treats masculinity as a problem to be policed, corrected, and outright punished. And those young men are often right. Economically, socially, culturally, and politically, we've told these young men that they are totally dispensable. We've openly discriminated against these young men, starting in preschool classrooms, forcing our children to forsake their whiteness or acknowledge their white privilege and profess that their masculinity is toxic. These kids aren't toxic, they're toddlers. As they grow up, the discrimination continues in college admissions, in academic scholarships and grants. And then they enter the workforce. Ship those jobs overseas. Be grateful for the melting pot that caused downward pressure on wages and ruthless labor market competition at the bottom of the labor scale. Again, discrimination in hiring and firing to hit corporate diversity quotas that are completely illegal by federal law. Those who get a job and keep a job are required to sit through endless DEI trainings to purge themselves of their implicit racism and sexism. You might not know that you're a racist or sexist, and you might have done nothing wrong. Nothing to suggest that you're a racist or a sexist, but we promise you you're a racist and a sexist. And sometimes when these men seek justice, they're turned away because the logic of disparate impact rooted in historical oppression reigns supreme over all of this stuff. You might have thought that the language of the Civil Rights Act was neutral, and you'd be right, but that has not been the case in its application. When every public conversation becomes a tribunal in which masculinity is treated as a problem or a threat, many men, especially those who already feel worthless, only hear contempt. And that contempt is dangerous. Their contempt, rooted in dwindling economic prospects and rampant but unrecognized discrimination that forces some of these men to the fringes. I mean, what happens? They get depressed. They fall into drugs. They start to hate the opposite sex too, which only makes things worse. Sometimes they're violent. Sometimes they're violent towards others. Sometimes they're violent towards themselves, and it tragically ends in suicide. This is not an excuse for young men who believe terrible things or do terrible things. It's exactly the opposite. It's a call to respond differently, for those young men to respond differently, and for our leaders in politics, culture, and business to respond differently. And our guest today is Josh Williams. Josh is a member of the Ohio Assembly and is currently running in Ohio's 9th Congressional District. While I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, nothing in this interview should be construed as an endorsement of his campaign. The Daily Signal is a nonprofit organization, and we do not endorse candidates. But the reason why this conversation with Josh is so important is that Josh is one of those rare men who suffered immensely, but has responded in a truly inspiring way. Josh has experienced homelessness. He knows the allure of opioids. He's been in economic despair. And he's also suffered at the hand of the state, which sought to keep him in public benefit subsistence slavery. There's nothing else I could call what the state of Ohio tried to do to Josh other than keep him in public benefit subsistence slavery. And he almost committed suicide. But Josh was able to completely turn his life around. It's one of the most amazing life stories I've ever heard. In his life as a public servant, he's thought deeply about the current crises facing our young men and what can be done to save these young men and solve these problems before it's too late. We hope you enjoy. Thank you so much for tuning into the Signal Sitdown, but before we get to the interview, we'd love it if you'd hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you may be joining us. And please remember to give us a 5-star review because we love your feedback. Remember, it's your government, and together we'll expose how it really works and how to affect real change. Without further ado, here's the interview. Josh Williams, welcome to the Signal Sitdown.
Thank you for having me on.
Of course, and we're very enthusiastic to have you on today, not just because this show's been focusing on the upcoming midterms, you obviously being a candidate in those midterms for Ohio's 9th district. I'm going up against, after the Republican primary, of course, going up against one of the gettable Democratic seats in the 2026 midterms. But the reason I have you on here today is not only to talk about the campaign, it's to talk about your life story, which I think is probably one of the most interesting stories I've heard from anybody running for public office, because the way that I understand it, it reflects some of the most worrying trends in American society. Homelessness, poverty, helplessness, suicide, hopelessness generally. I mean, these are the cultural and political realities in America right now, and you've devoted your life after a very difficult upbringing to try to fix those. And so I just want to give you a wide berth here to tell your story. Born and raised in Toledo, Ohio.
Yeah, I currently serve in the state legislature. I serve in the Ohio House of Representatives in my second term. My first term in leadership, I serve as majority whip in the Ohio House. But I'm not a career politician. My life's journey I thought would never bring me to this point in my life, especially as a declared Republican candidate for Congress. I was raised in the inner city of Toledo. At the time of my birth, my dad was 68 years old. My mom was 26. My dad was born in 1915 in Tunica, Mississippi, in the Jim Crow South. And his parents sent him up here to Cincinnati in hopes of a better life, and eventually he made his way to Toledo and met my mom. But unfortunately, at 5 years old, he passed away from cancer. So I was left to be raised by a single mother in Toledo, in poverty, struggling.
And what years was this?
So I was born in 1984.
Mhm.
My dad died in 1990, right before I was 6 years old. He was 74 at the time of his death. And, we were left without direction. My father was a reverend. So I always had that Christian church upbringing. But my mom, she struggled. My mom has like a seventh grade education. She had, three black boys in the inner city. My mom's white and Native American. Trying to shape us as men as a single mother is hard, right? In a society where, we technically don't really look like her that much. But eventually, we progressed, and I made my way out towards the University of Toledo. We moved into a new neighborhood. My world opened up. I now went from a majority minority community to a more diverse community. My friends groups opened up. I started having friends where their parents are doctors and lawyers, and I'm going over their house to spend a night. And I'm like, wait, you got a bathroom attached to your bedroom? What the heck is this? So it kind of opened my worldview a little bit. I started to excel. I became an honor student. But unfortunately, at the age of 18, I dropped out of high school when I was homeless. So I spent about 6 months sleeping on park benches and going to friends' houses, sleeping on their couches when their parents would let me, and not knowing where my next meal would come from. Working a bunch of minimum wage jobs just to try to get myself out of that situation.
So this is at this point, we're into the early 2000s.
Yeah, yeah. So this is 2003, 2004.
And if you don't mind me asking, I this question, but your mom put a ton of effort into you. At the same time, you grew up without a father in those critical formative years. I asked you what years that was because in the 80s and 90s, I mean, this is kind of when you had the apotheosis of globalization.
Yeah.
Both Democrats and Republicans were bending the knee to neoliberal economics and to the politics of globalization. And at that point in time, you could still see the warning signs in states, particularly like Ohio, that this was going to have a massive disruptive effect on American life. And uh, we know the statistics of the breakdown of the American family. It
Yeah.
plagues black families, it plagues white families. It's plaguing every family in this country. Of course, your family, different story with your father passing away. But I mean, your decision to drop out of high school that led to this homelessness, do you think there was a part of it not having your dad around? I mean, what was that
Oh,
like?
absolutely. I mean, it was a directional thing. Not having my father around, I turned into a real rambunctious teenager. I was the youngest in my family. My mom was kind of tired of raising kids. If you won't listen, I turned 18 at the end of my junior year. If you don't want to listen to my rules, you can be out on your own. I'm that young egotistical guy that's like, I can do this on my own.
Mm.
I get out there, I work all summer, working three jobs as cashier, lifeguard, swim instructor. I built up a little bit of money. I got my first apartment. I'm having friends over. As a young man, I'm living the dream. And then reality hit when school started, and I got to be in school from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And I can't work one of my jobs. And my second job fired me because I couldn't show up on time because I needed to be there at 2, and my last class didn't get out till 3. So then I struggled and couldn't pay rent, and found myself evicted, and storing all of my stuff over a friend's house in the basement, not knowing what I was going to do. But God has a certain way of working in your life, man. Like, I was ready to give up in that moment. There was plenty of nights sleeping on that park bench, getting woke up by the sunrise, and that was my alarm clock to get up and go to the gas station. I had to be there at 7 o'clock. And in that moment, I was ready to give up, but God works in mysterious ways. I met the mother of my son Matthew, and she got pregnant, and she had 2 kids from a prior relationship. So I moved in with her sister in her sister's basement on a moldy mattress, watching her belly grow with my 2 step kids upstairs sleeping on the couch because they didn't have their own rooms. In a 2-bedroom house in the inner city of Toledo, we packed in 7 adults and 8 children.
Mm.
All of us were struggling. And when I found out she was pregnant, I remember being overjoyed and having a new sense of responsibility, not only to myself, but to a young family. And I went out and I found good, hard, honest work. I became a subcontractor at the railroad.
Can I ask 2 questions
Yeah,
before you get
go right
to
ahead.
your railroad story? Uh, the first is 6 adults, 8 children in that room. I mean,
Yeah. 7
or
adults, 8 children.
7 adults, 8 children
Yep.
in that apartment. You said all of them were struggling.
Yep.
What were the sources of that struggle in particular?
Some of it was lack of workforce development training. Um, Many of them didn't have a high school diploma. I didn't have a high school diploma. The mother of my son didn't have a high school diploma. Her sisters didn't have high school diplomas. So we were all working minimum wage jobs, cashiers at this restaurant, waitresses at this restaurant,
Service industry.
service industry.
That's something to note too.
Yeah,
Not factory work.
not factory work, low income service jobs. My soon to be brother-in-law at the time was working for a small construction company part-time. Eventually, he made his way to a railroad subcontractor as well. So it was more about workforce development skills. For me, it wasn't that I didn't have the hard work. It was that I didn't have the marketable skills to even be able to go to apply to these places.
Mhm.
I didn't have the work history. I'm barely 19 at the time. And that kind of just led to that struggle. And it became a passion of mine when I got into public service. We'll talk about it later. But I remember it just so happened that someone knew this subcontractor, and it was a small company, and they were hiring laborers for the railroad. And someone referred me to him, and he came and he asked me, my background. I'm a former lifeguard and swim instructor. He's like, I don't think you can take physical labor. And I'm like, look, guy, I want to put in the hard work to show you. And he gave me an opportunity, and I started working my butt off. And eventually, they offered me a position full time, and I started working there. My life got brighter.
Mhm.
Uh,
And this is all in the name of providing for your child
yeah,
and your child's mother.
Yeah, and this is all while her belly's growing, and she's about 8 months pregnant. We get our first place together, in the north end of Toledo. So I get a nice little house that I'm renting. My kids got their own bedrooms. We're buying furniture. I think I'm living the American dream at that point as a young 21-year-old with a child on the way.
Can I ask one question about this? Because you said you grew up in a Christian household.
Yeah,
Father was a reverend,
yeah,
and when you heard that your wife was pregnant, you were overjoyed.
yeah.
But at that time, especially in places like Toledo, a lot of people aren't happy when they hear
Yeah.
that news, and the conversation becomes about abortion and whether or not that's the right decision.
We
Of
had
course.
we had that conversation.
Yeah. So tell me about that
Yeah, I
conversation.
mean, I came so at the time I started working for the railroad while we were still living in her sister's basement. And I came home from work, and I remember she had told me she was pregnant a few weeks earlier, and I come home and she's like, I think I'm gonna get an abortion. And I remember begging her not to abort my son. And I'm asking her why. She's like, look, we're sleeping on a moldy mattress. My kids are upstairs sleeping on the couch. Like it's just a bad time. We're not in a position to raise another child. And I'm like, listen, I promise you I will put in the hard work to always provide for the needs of this family. I may not be able to always give you everything you want, but I will provide the needs of this family, and I will die trying. And she said, okay, I trust you. And she decided to continue, letting my son grow inside of her. And we started looking forward to it. I started buying baby stuff, and we're saving up for the place. And then we get to the place. And that's what was so impactful in my life is that, this is July 7th of 2005. My son's 3 weeks away from being born. I'm working at the railroad in hail and rain, and I fall 30 feet off the side of a train.
Mm.
And I blacked out from the fall. And when I woke up, I was on a conference room table in the break room, and I couldn't feel my legs. And I woke up to my fiance standing next to me, crying when I told her I couldn't feel my legs. And
Mm.
just the hopelessness I saw in her face just made me break down. And eventually I made my way to the hospital. Paramedics took me, and by then the feeling that came back. And for about 2 years, I fought through that injury. Going to every doctor, pain management doctor,
So
surgeon.
I imagine this has to be spinal.
There. Yeah.
You fall 30 feet.
Yep.
I'm imagine on your back.
I landed directly on my right leg. It was locked
Oh.
in place. So it shifted everything in my spine to the left.
Oh.
So I got all this back pain and I'm doing what they tell what doctors do. They're like, "Oh, it's a sprain strain. Here's some anti-inflammatory, here's some pain meds." And so for like 2 years, I'm fighting through this injury, man. And it's getting worse and worse and worse. But I'm watching my family grow, you know, and my son was born and I'm going to parent teacher conferences and kids football and baseball games. And I'm living a dream, but I'm hurting. And I did a 12-hour shift at the railroad in December of 2007, 2 weeks before Christmas. And I came home and I took a nap on the couch. When I got home, my kids weren't out of school yet. And when I woke up, my kids are running around. And again, I can't feel my legs. And I tell my wife, I'm like, I can't feel my legs. So I get rushed to the emergency room. This time they do MRIs and CTs and they find out that my spine is being compressed from the injury. And I remember laying in the hospital bed and the doctors walked in with a look I'll never forget. And they looked at me and they said, "Josh, if you don't have emergency back surgery, you may never be able to walk again. Your legs are going to continue to give out and it may become permanent."
And I'm sorry, the initial injury happens in 2005.
Yep.
And this is 2 weeks before Christmas in 2007.
Yep.
And that points us to two really big things for folks living across the American heartland, but people in Ohio have especially suffered from, and that is the pain medications, the
Yep.
opioids, and healthcare costs.
Yep.
I mean, don't take my word for it. Take the word of one Elizabeth Warren, who used to write really interesting things about the two-income trap and medical bankruptcy
Yeah.
before she became a national figure in the Democratic Party. I mean, healthcare, the cost of healthcare and medical bankruptcy is a massive threat
Yeah.
to American families across this country. Did you ever struggle with those opioids? Did you ever say, "Oh, this is like really powerful stuff. This is really concerning." And I see how a lot of other people fall prey to that.
Oh, absolutely. So I was on opiates for almost 10 years. And I had to fight to get
10 years.
yeah, I had to fight to get off of them. I was on some of the most heavy dose opioids that were forcibly removed from the market. Opana, ER, extended release. So when I first got injured, it was your normal few Percocets or oxycodone or naproxen. But as my injury worsened, because when they told me I had to have emergency back surgery, I went on disability instantaneously.
Right.
Most humbling experience I had in my life was that Christmas, standing in the Salvation Army line in Lucas County, waiting to get Barbie dolls and rubber footballs for my kids to have Christmas gifts to open because I couldn't pay for anything for Christmas that year because I didn't know if every dollar had to go towards the next rent because I didn't know when my disability would turn on. It was a humbling experience for me that year. But I had 2 emergency back surgeries in 6 months. They didn't work. Laid in bed for the next 6 consecutive years.
Mm.
So all the doctors did was hand me a bunch of pain meds and said, "Hey, there's nothing else we can do. Get used to your suffering." And I watched my body get addicted to those pain medications. Luckily, God willing, we did testing later on to prove it, but my body didn't have receptors to make it where I got a mental high from opiates. My
Huh.
body became addicted to it. So I will go through withdrawal symptoms every day when these extended release pills would not go 12 hours like they were supposed to. I would have the cold sweats and waking up in pain and shivers and I used to be able to tell the time of day by how I felt. I would be in a dark room with the curtains drawn, sleep all day, and I would wake up and I would be able to tell my ex-wife exactly what time it was by the withdrawal symptoms I was having. I would say it's 7 p.m. and I don't take my pill until 8. And she's like, "How do you know?" I woke up in a pool of sweat, my body's shivering, I have a headache. I can tell I'm in withdrawal. It's around 7. And she's like, "Yeah, it's 7:15. You can't take your medication for another 45 minutes."
That's unbelievable.
I struggled through that for a long time, a very long time. And later in my journey, I fought really hard to get off the medication. So after like 2 years, this is 2008 to 2010, I laid in bed for 2 consecutive years. Workers' comp in Ohio would not allow me to have further surgeries. They just wouldn't. They were like, "Hey, you're permanently disabled. Here's your disability check. Here's your medication. Go home and suffer." That was my life. And there was weeks at a time I slept 2, 3 days in a row. I was on sleeping pills. I was on opiates, muscle relaxers, stool softeners, all types of stuff.
And so you had these this strange medical phenomenon where you didn't have the receptors for this to impact your brain. And so I imagine, right, like part of the way in which people stay in the disability opiate trap is it does affect their
Yeah.
brain. And uh, it affects their brain in part, I think, because if you if it only affected your body, you would probably go crazy. Like, there's nobody who wants to live in a bed collecting a disability check
Yeah.
and taking opioids. Like, what was that like for you, just feeling your dignity stripped away, essentially?
I'm I mean, I came moments away from committing suicide.
Mm.
So in 2008, after my first 2 back surgeries, doctors told me I would need like a multi-level fusion. Workers' comp wouldn't approve it. Doctors told me you're never gonna walk again without a walker or a cane. I mean, I barely could walk to the restroom, man. I spent 6 years in a bed where I had to, urinate in a plastic urinal and listen to my ex-wife and kids dump it in the toilet while they gagged. Like, dude, I was in a pit of despair that I can't describe to you. And after doctors told me there was no hope in 2009, I told my ex-wife to take my kids to Meyer and go get some things. And I sat on the edge of my bed with my gun and I was ready to kill myself. I wrote out my suicide note. No different than the journal in front of you right now. I used to have a daily journal about my pain, and I wrote out my suicide note and I was ready to kill myself. And in walks my 3-year-old Matthew. He walked in. He said, "Daddy, I'm hungry." I tucked my gun away and I grabbed my kid and I cried, man. I cried for hours. And when she came back, I asked some choice words from my ex-wife. I didn't know why she had left him there. I hadn't picked Matthew up in over 2 years. I hadn't cared for him. I barely got out of that bed for 2 years. I couldn't care for myself. And she said something kept telling her to leave him behind. She couldn't explain it. She said something kept telling her to leave her behind. Now later on, I know that was God working in his own mysterious ways that, he sent one of his foot soldiers in that day to save my life because he had a bigger assignment for me.
Always kids, right?
And
Were the
that
foot soldiers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that night, I remember this, man. I laid in bed crying myself to sleep, begging to him. See, up until then, I used to look at myself as a victim. I used to cry out to God, "Why me? Why'd I have to have an older father? Why'd he have to die when I was young? Why'd I have to be raised in poverty? Why'd I have to be raised in such horrible conditions that I had dead roaches surgically removed from my ears, causing hearing loss?" To this day, I still grapple with. Why'd I have to drop out of high school? Why'd I have to get injured when I was doing why me? I used to scream out to God all the time. And in that moment, man, when I went to prayer, I asked him, I said, "Man, if you show me the way out of this bed, if you show me the way out of poverty, I promise I'll put in the hard work. Well, why'd you do this to me?" And man, it was as clear as day in my mind. He's like, "Why not you? Why can't you overcome? Why can't you dig yourself out of this bed?" And I'm like, "Show me the way." And sure enough, I mean, within days, I was introduced to the right lawyer in John Palafka. I was introduced to the right chiropractor in Michael Jajuga. I was introduced to the right mentors and friends. And God just started working miracles in my life. Hope came back. I got saved at my church. My son got saved. Like, the motivation came all over again. I started fighting really hard to get the surgeries that I needed. And I went to Cleveland and I had 2 more back surgeries. I had metal put in my spine to stabilize it. I had weight loss surgery in 2013 to lose the weight. And I worked hard to get out of that bed, man. There was long nights of physical therapy, long nights of recovering from surgeries with severe pain. And at the age of 29, I felt healthy enough to get out of that bed and be an example to my kids. And my lawyer, John Palafka, had convinced me that I had become really proficient in workers' comp law over 6 years because I had nothing else to do.
You had a workers' comp
I,
book,
I,
and you were
I,
figuring this thing
I
out.
had nothing else to do. I had a laptop and they gave me access to all my medical records and I used to read them. I always wanted to be a doctor when I was a kid. I was studying anatomy and physiology when I was in high school and then I dropped out. I was thinking about maybe becoming a chiropractor. So I'm reading all these medical reports and learning what I read, Josh has ligamentous flavum. And I'm like, well, what is that? And I go and look it up and find out it's enlargement of ligament tissue. And oh, okay. So I became knowledgeable about my own medical condition so I could articulate it to doctors, what I was feeling, what I was experiencing. I became really good at workers' comp law so I could articulate it to my lawyer. And he said, Josh, if you just got a 2-year degree in paralegal studies, I would hire you. Any workers' comp lawyer would hire you. They would see how brilliant you are. We need to get you into school. By then, I had my GED that I got way earlier. And I said, hey, I'm game. Show me the way. And so we went to the state of Ohio and said, hey, Josh wants to go to college as a form of workforce development training to dig himself out of that situation and dig himself out of poverty. And the state of Ohio told me I wasn't allowed to.
Why?
because I was an injured worker. In the state of Ohio, the Bureau of Workers' Compensation will not pay for workforce development training for injured workers over 6 months. In less than,
Even if you theoretically need to make a transition
yeah,
so that you want to contribute to society.
less than 3% of injured workers in the state of Ohio have ever received workforce development training. At the time of us applying, 0% had ever got workforce development training over six months. So for about a year, we battled with the state of Ohio and we threatened to sue them. So we drafted a lawsuit. We were going to sue the state of Ohio under the Americans with Disabilities Act, saying that they were discriminating against me because of my disability. The state of Ohio did not want that precedent set, so they said, we will turn a blind eye to you going to college for 2 years, so long as at the end of 2 years you try to enter into the workforce. So for 2 years, they kept paying my disability because they had previously told me if I enrolled in college, they were going to cut off my disability. And we asked them, what do you want me to do? And they said, we want you to go back and work a cashier's job like you did when you were 18. That minimum wage job will pay you the difference in your wages from your benefits to what you make on minimum wage for 5 years. And at the end of that, get on public assistance, and that's the rest of your life.
So that's slavery.
Yeah.
There's no other way to phrase that.
They were literally relegating me to perpetual poverty, and my kids, my ex-wife, they were forcing us to be in slavery to the system instead of giving me the opportunity to dig myself out of that situation. And I fought. I fought for my right to chase the American dream, and we won. They let me go to college. And at the age of 30, I enrolled at the University of Toledo as a freshman. In just 5 years, at the age of 35, I was graduating from law school.
Wow.
I have 3 college degrees. I have an associate's with distinction, a bachelor's with honors. I graduated magna cum laude with a 3.85 GPA. I earned a full scholarship to UT Law, graduated a semester early, and passed the bar exam my first time. In 5 years, I changed my life simply because government got out of the way and let me chase the American dream.
And it was an American dream that you probably didn't even think possible when you previously had a glimpse at what the American dream was with that railroad job.
Yeah.
And like the idea that the state would come in and relegate somebody's life to poverty is the exact opposite of everything that I think people back at home know and love about this country. But people in this town, people in New York, people in Los Angeles, they haven't seen or they don't get a taste of nearly as much as folks in Ohio or folks throughout the heartland of this country
Yeah.
do for how the state tries to keep you in that type of a situation. And so with that life story, I want to go back and talk about some of those issues that you faced and the way out.
Yeah.
Because like you, so many young people in this country feel like their opportunities are drying up.
Yeah.
Whether that's their work is being relegated to service sector jobs that pay minimum wage, or they graduate college with massive amount of government debt, of student loan debt. It affects everybody across the socioeconomic scale. When you see those young people talk about their economic opportunities, one, where do you think this kind of all stems from? And two, what's the message that you send to them?
Yeah, I think the lack of economic opportunity stems from the government's belief, starting I think in the 1970s, that it was in the national interest to dissolve the nuclear family. Because we saw what it looked like to have a truly robust family unit that's able to survive on their own financially without government subsidies, uh, be in opposition to large government. And government actively tried to dissolve them by doing things like weaponizing the welfare system, making it where you couldn't have a father in the household, the no man rule, introducing drugs into certain communities and putting people behind bars for mandatory minimum, getting people hooked on public assistance and making it where, if you make $1 above, you're cut off your benefits. I think that was the most detrimental effect that we had, not only on minority communities, but white communities as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there's a sense of hopelessness because back then in the 1960s and 70s, you could go to high school, you could graduate with high school with certificates in carpentry and electrical. You had nursing assistants, You were able to graduate from high school, enter the workforce, get married, have kids, buy a house, buy a car cash
Mhm.
from the same assembly line that you're working on and live the American dream. But that wasn't conducive to the idea of big government, and especially not the Democrat way of looking at their party's political power in the United States. I think the solution that I experience and that I continue to promote is workforce development. It's the idea that you don't need to get a 2, 4, and 6 year degree, riddle yourself with a ton of student loan debt, 9 times out of 10 coming out of college as a flaming liberal. Um, Instead, that you can go to some of my apprenticeship and journeyman programs or some of the unions up in Northwest Ohio and get a career making $100,000 a year plus with no student loan debt. Or you can go to some of our workforce development programs that are state provided. We have IMAP, we have Tech Cred, we have WIOA in the state of Ohio that I promoted and expanded during my time in the legislature to go and get a 6 month credential that only costs about $3,000. And I can show you up in my area where I can send you to go get a credential in fiber optic technician. You got a 100% job placement rate, making 50 to 70,000 starting out, and then Buckeye Cable will send you to their business class to teach you how to be a subcontractor, where you make 150 as a subcontractor to Buckeye Cable installing fiber optic and internet. Like, there's so many opportunities if government really wants to dig people out of poverty. But the problem that we have is we have two parties. We have the Republicans that want to do that because we want businesses to come. We want jobs to come. You see Trump's agenda, bringing the manufacturing bases back here, getting the companies to invest in America and into great states like Ohio. We have to have the skilled workforce to be able to fill those positions. That's where there's a shortfall. And we've continued to try to push workforce development. But then you have the Democrats who don't want you to dig yourself out of poverty. They want you to stay in poverty because every election cycle, they get to get your vote by saying that the racist Republicans are going to take your SNAP benefits away, and your Medicaid, and your Obamacare, and your Section 8, and all of the subsidies that they've been providing for decades that result in them having political power. It's not a coincidence that when you look at the hubs of poverty in each of the states, they're always Democrat controlled. And in those same hubs, the education system fails. Kids are graduating from high school, barely can read.
So everybody wants power in politics, but there's a specific kind of pathology at play when we're talking about liberal or democratic power, right? Like, if you get elected, you want to help people. You have power while doing that. It's just power used responsibly. With great power comes great responsibility, all of that. But to use power for the explicit purpose of keeping people downtrodden, I mean, what's behind that, do you think? I mean, why would your motivation for obtaining power and then concentrating power be to keep people down?
Yeah, I can only speculate because I don't hold that personal perspective. But, and I'll say it, the Democrat policies that I watch be pushed by a lot of affluent white liberals is no different than the Southern Democrat policies of Jim Crow and of slavery back in the day, which was you use the poverty, you use the trauma of others to enshrine your power. And I see no distinction between the two. I mean, when I watch people have this soft bigotry of low expectations, which is I have literally talked to people to their face about let's get to the root cause of the problems. Why are black people underrepresented in certain industries, certain careers? Let's get to the education. Let's get more people qualified. Their response will be they shouldn't have to be more qualified. They should just get the position. Well, that's the DEI drama that we've been going through for the last couple decades. And then when I say, okay, well, let's have a conversation about people that are on public assistance. What's the problem with a 20-hour work requirement? I mean, I've been disabled since the injury. All through college, I had to, after my first 2 years, workers' comp required me to work 20 hours a week.
Mhm.
So I'm 50% disabled. I worked 20 hours a week my sophomore, junior, senior, and all of my law school years until I became a practicing attorney. In order to continue in college, that was the requirement that I work 20 hours a week. Even while I was a full-time student, a dad, a husband, a coach in my community, a mentor, I still did it. But when I talk to a liberal about that, they say, well, they shouldn't have to work 20 hours in order to get those public subsidies because you don't know what trauma they've been through. You don't know what struggles they've been through. I've been through those struggles. I've been through those traumas. And it is insulting to me that you think you can just give me a bunch of stuff for free and that's going to make me um, somehow satisfied, just surviving.
And it speaks to the dignity conversation that we had
Yeah.
previously, where it's like, oh, this is your you have zero expectations of individuals and you have no desire for them to rise above their station, whether that station has been self-inflicted or it has been in the course of really tragic events that are out of their control. And you spoke a little bit about this, but opioid addiction,
Yeah.
right? It's not just folks who are given prescriptions out of control. Like, that's not the whole story. There's people who get hooked on it on their own volition too. And all of that's tied to this overarching helplessness, right? Opioid addiction and opioid deaths, plus suicide deaths. Um, this crisis of dignity, this
Yeah.
crisis of worth in America, where do you think that comes from?
I think it's a lack of hope, a lack of a better future. Some of it is mental health crisis. Some of it is substance abuse. Some people are prone to substance abuse. Their genetics makes them more prone to when they are exposed to a medication for, a sprained ankle and the doctors were just giving out Percocets like they were candy. That exposure to that chemical, they had a higher likelihood of being addicted. So that's a true issue that we had was the prevalence of the use of opioids to treat everyday small minor pain.
Mhm.
But then you also have this area of hopelessness, and it's not just for the drug users; it's for the drug dealers. I'm in a community where, you know, there's a lot of people being convicted of drug trafficking, and I'm a criminal defense attorney by trade. It's given me a perspective on the criminal justice system to where I think we should have increased penalties for repeat drug traffickers, repeat violent offenders. You should also have a pathway for rehabilitation, especially for individuals that the driving motivation in their criminality is substance abuse. You have to be able to break that cycle of substance abuse. You can't just put them in prison without solving the problem because when you let them out, they're going to go right back to using again and right back to engaging in criminal conduct. And that's not good for public safety. So I think part of it is that hopelessness. Because I mean, when you have no hope of a better future, why aren't you using that substance? Why aren't you drinking a bunch of alcohol? Why aren't you using marijuana every single day? Why aren't you shooting up heroin? Why aren't you taking meth to cover up the fact that you have no hope of a better future?
Do you think that future, the hope of that future is like, I guess we know that it is. We know it's economic and we
Yeah,
know that it's cultural. Um, and we also know that, in my opinion at least, it's religious. I mean, break this down for us: the economic conditions, the cultural conditions, the religious conditions, the decline of religiosity,
yeah.
rather. I mean, how do each one of these factors contribute to someone who ends up as your client,
Yeah,
who is,
that's a
been
great question.
charged of a crime?
That's a great question. I think it started with the breakdown of the family unit
Yeah.
and people turning away from God. I mean, because we're taught that one of the greatest accomplishments you can ever have is starting a family, raising children that are closer to Christ. That's where you get a sense of self worth on top of like your 9 to 5. Like back in the day, your worth was not attached to your job unless you were really into a high career track. People went and worked in a factory to provide for their family and their children because they had a moral obligation to provide. So when you start dissolving the family, you're not working for anybody but yourself. I've been there, right? It was fatherhood that shifted my focus. So I think that's the first starting point is that we're taking away this emphasis on family. The government is incentivizing single motherhood by their tax structure, by the welfare state, by the eligibility for subsidies. We're literally encouraging women to be promiscuous and raise children in single parent households, even though we know the studies show that there's an increased risk of criminality, an increased risk of dropping out, an increased risk of homelessness.
It's the most vicious cycle
It is.
ever.
And it's like it's so clear of a problem that needs to be addressed, but people don't want to address it. I can't understand why they don't want to address it. But then the second part is the economic part, which is, yeah, even if you don't have a hope of a great career, some people don't even have a hope of being able to provide for themselves. Um, But then we've also created this culture of you shouldn't have to provide for yourself. It's okay to live on public assistance.
Mhm.
We saw it during COVID when we were paying people to stay home. I've talked to young girls in my inner city that, we go in classrooms all the time, and I say, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I want to have 3 kids. And I'm like, "Really? You didn't say you want to have a husband?" And I'm like, "Okay." She's like, "No, I don't want to have a husband." "Well, why?" "Because then I won't get public assistance." "Where are you learning this from?" "Oh, well, my mom. My mom told me." And they've learned the system to where it's more beneficial to have 3 kids by 3 different men because you get more. You get more in child support, you get more in public assistance. Like,
So there's a tradition of
there
this.
there is an incentive of leading this type of lifestyle. And then when the children are raised in hopeless situations with no hope of a better future than getting out of the community, you wonder why they turn to crime.
Mhm.
You wonder why they turn to drug dealing. Because I've sat in jail cells with 15-year-old kids that were accused of murder and said, where do we go wrong as a society? And it's like, oh, I got a single mom. She works 3 jobs. I got 4 siblings. I'm the one getting them up for school. I'm the one putting them on the bus and doing their homework. So when I finally get away from the house, I kind of wild out and go and run the streets and gang bang and rob and steal. And it resulted in me murdering somebody. I'm like, oh my God, we as a society let that kid down. Not just the mom, but we as a society let that kid down.
When you point out that, like, teenagers know this,
Mhm.
they haven't even graduated high school. I think the great myth is that every single person who receives this type of public assistance stumbled into it somehow. But what you've just told me is that there are traditions and habits within these communities that like the kid does not know the law, nor does she know how to fill out the paperwork if she was in that situation already, right?
Yeah.
She would learn that eventually if
Yeah.
she chose that really tragic life path. But somehow she already knows, like, this is like a premeditated lifestyle.
Oh yeah.
And
Like,
that's just it's so hard to comprehend that, like, everybody who is an advocate for providing a hand up needs to know that there is a mentality that has taken root that says, I'm going to take that hand up, but I'm just going to leave myself dangling on the side of the cliff. I'm never actually going to climb out of it."
yeah. And it's this pervasive culture of public assistance poverty. And I mean, we've seen videos. There's a video online you'll see of a lady yelling at her daughter because her daughter went out and got a job. Teenage daughter got a job. And she's yelling at her because she's like, that income is going to count against my public assistance. You're not allowed to work. Like, the system teaches you that. And the social workers teach you that. You work you make $1 over, you're cut off. Therefore, when that boss comes and says, hey, you're a great worker, I want to offer you a promotion, it's going to come with a $2 raise. I've watched people say, no, thank you. I'll get cut off my benefits. I've had people. My wife was in HR for an auto manufacturer. And in the city of Toledo, we told some people that we knew, hey, they're going to be hiring in a couple weeks. It's 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. You're going to make this much money. They're like, no, 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 I'm okay. I don't want to work that hard for $700. And I'm like, wait a second, you get paid way more than $700, every 2 weeks. And they're like, no, no, no. If you look at my Section 8, if you look at my SNAP benefits, my Medicaid, my cash assistance, my free child care, you add all that up, I'm gonna lose it by taking that job. So I look at it as the difference between the two.
These are smart people,
They're like,
actually.
yeah, and they're like, I'm gonna work 12 hours a day for 7 days a week to make $700 every 2 weeks. I'd rather just not make the $700. I'm like, oh my God. Like, that's an actual analysis that you go through. And I didn't realize it because when I was getting off of Social Security, I was on Social Security disability when I was injured. They have a reentry program, a workforce reentry program to motivate you to go back into the workforce and get off of disability. Now, I'll be physically disabled for the rest of my life, but I'll never be on SSDI ever again because I'm going to generate my own revenue because they gave me a chance to get off. In that program, you can make as much money as you want for 9 consecutive months or 11 months in a 36-month cycle. And if you make over an income threshold, you have to report your income. And when you make over a certain threshold for 9 consecutive months or 11 months in a 36-month, you're turned off of your disability. But the idea is you can make as much as you want to build up a nest egg. And I remember I was a practicing attorney, young in my career, practicing attorney, and I had a really good month. I'm not gonna tell you how much I made that month, but I had
Been a good month.
I had a good month. And I remember I called my Social Security case, and I called Social Security and I talked to my caseworker and I said, hey, dude, I get like $1,600 in Social Security, man. I had a really good month. I've had like 8 consecutive really good months. Like, can you just turn it off? And they're like, no, you're entitled to, I think it was, I forget what the amount of months, but they're like, you're entitled to 4 more months. And I'm like, I don't need it financially. And they're like, this is what we encourage you to do. Put it into a savings account. And if there's ever a bad month, you got a back injury, you ever have a bad month where you physically can't go into court and you can't generate revenue, you got a nest egg, so you never have to come back on the system. Why is that designed differently than the rest of our subsidies?
Right.
Why is the rest of the subsidies a all or nothing? Right? To where Democrats can threaten that, hey, you're going to get it cut off. You work that one extra shift. You make that one extra dollar. Why isn't it titrated down like Social Security to where you incentivize people to go? So I introduced legislation in the state of Ohio for it. It's called a hand up. And it's a pilot program that we're trying to get passed.
I didn't even know that was the name when I said that
Yeah.
earlier.
It's called a hand up, and it literally says, "Hey, we want you to engage in one of our workforce development programs.
Mhm.
We want you to gain the marketable skills to be able to re-enter into the workforce and gain a higher salary. And when you do that, though you're going to lose your eligibility for the federal programs, the state of Ohio is going to step in and subsidize your child care. We're going to give you a voucher towards child care, right? Housing, food. We're going to do it for 9 months, and the goal is for you to transition off of this and never return."
And it's almost impossible to have the conversation with somebody who has looked at their own financials and the benefits they receive and say, I'm not going to take the job at the auto plant because it would actually harm my financial standing, about how, no, actually, you should sacrifice all those public benefits for that $700
Yeah,
job at the auto
exactly.
plant because it's going to provide you more dignity and
Exactly.
more freedom in the long run before changing the incentive structure, right? Like you have to change the incentive structure first
Yeah.
to even broach that topic of conversation. I feel like you and I would both tell this person, no, the job at the auto factory is good for you actually.
Yeah.
Take it anyway. But from the other person's point of view, why would I shoot myself in the foot when I know for a fact if I go into that job, I'm not going to receive any help whatsoever. I'm not going like it, it, y- I'm not going to abandon
Yeah.
the safety net.
Yeah. As a government, you have to take that decision out of the hands of that individual person that's on public assistance.
Right.
And in Ohio, we're trying to do that. So in the budget, out of my office, I introduced an amendment to our budget, and it got in the budget. We're the first state that I'm aware of that not only did the 20-hour work requirement, but we did an additional workforce development requirement. It says that if you work for 12 consecutive months and you don't dig yourself off of Medicaid, that means you're working at low minimum wage jobs, barely under the income threshold, that at the end of that 12 months, working 20 hours a week, which is, 5 hours a week for 4 weeks, that you are going to be required to go into workforce development training to maintain your Medicaid. We are going to require you to go into some of these free programs that we're dumping hundreds of millions of dollars in the state of Ohio so you can get the workforce development training to gain marketable skills to dig yourself out of poverty in order to maintain your benefits. We're going to take that decision away from you and we're going to say, look, this is the track that you're going to have to go on.
Mhm.
And eventually the goal is to get really good case management to where you go through what I went through at Harbor in Toledo, where they do aptitude testing, interest testing, job market testing. And we get this whole report that says your interest, your character traits, your aptitude, say these areas are good for you to keep you motivated. Like you would actually like your job if you went into these areas. Here's the industries that are available in those areas. Here's the jobs that are available in Ohio in those industries. Here's the ones locally available, and this is what the salary is. And then our analysis said, does the 2-year education Josh wants justify him going into that career, which was paralegal studies? And the answer was yes.
Right. And it's not only you said taking the choice away, it's it's not necessarily taking the choice away as you just laid out. It's changing the calculation.
Yeah.
It's changing those short-term prospects, that rat race that keeps you tied to these benefits into something that can be a long-term
Yeah.
trajectory for
It's
your
just
life and for your
it's
family.
conditional funding. It's no different than saying you have to do X in order to get Section 8 housing.
Mhm.
You have to do X in order to get Medicaid. You gotta do 20 hours of work. I think it's reasonable for us to get to the point of saying, "Look, where's the jobs available in the 9th congressional district? This is why I'm running for Congress. Where's the jobs available? You guys aren't able to fill these jobs, employers. Tell me what the minimum skills are you want. My job as an elected official is to go back to my training providers and say, all right, what credentials can we create that gives them those minimal skills? Employer, hey, will you give them an interview if I get them to get this credential? Yeah, okay. You're in public assistance. I need you to enroll in this program to get this credential. I'm tag you up with an employer. You transition into that spot. The employer's happy because we were able to fill the position so they can fill their order and continue to grow as an employer. The employee's happy because we help get them into a career that's fulfilling to them. The kids are happy because now they're actually getting provided for. They're getting the education at home. They're getting the extra money for tutoring, and they're watching their dad or mom get up every day and go to work and come home excited, and they can finally go on a family vacation. You're helping society as a whole, and I think if you do that, then more people are willing to buy into the whole. The community is at stake compared to the individual success.
Mhm.
I think you gotta get Americans believing not only in their own American dream, but just believing back in the American dream, period. JFK used to say it. It's not about, what America can do for you. It's about what you can do for America. And I think it's reasonable to say you're not gonna be allowed to just be a strain on the system, taking subsidies every single day, and you're an able-bodied American who can fill these jobs for our employers and be a productive citizen of society. That's why I'm running for Congress.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about, you know, young men that or I'm sorry, young women that you've encountered and the message that you've sent to them. But everybody's talking about the crisis amongst young men right now who have a lot of anxiety, a lot of hatred, a lot of kind of disdain for a system where they don't see an ability for advancement. I mean, what is your message to young men who find themselves angry or in states of despair?
I think there's definitely hope of a better future for you, and it's right in front of you. This society has kind of taken out that hard work mentality from a lot of our men. They for a long time were villainized for having masculine traits by the left. But yet the core is that a man should be able to not only provide for himself but any family that he starts. I can show these young people that the jobs are available. You just got to be willing to put in the hard work. And a lot of these guys don't want to work hard anymore. That's why I used to coach even when I was disabled. My football team on the back of the jerseys were not kids' names. It was 25 character traits. And I used to make you run and do push-ups, not because you fumbled a football, but because you were dishonest. And on the back of your jersey is the character trait of honesty. We got to get back to putting these character traits in our kids and exposing it to them very early on. So in Ohio, I introduced legislation called the GRAD Act. And it proposes at least exposing these young men and women to the opportunities that are available outside their immediate community. So in their junior or senior year, they'll get what's called exit orientation. That's where the military, the labor unions, the for-profit companies, the regional chambers of commerce and universities will all come in and give presentations and expose these kids to everything that's available to them. You don't need to go get a 4-year degree and get a bachelor's degree in psychology and barely be able to make a living when I got a floor installer over here wanting to pay you $70,000 as a 19-year-old.
Hmm.
You know, you can make that decision if you really are passionate about philosophy to go and study that. But if you just want to get out of your parents' house like I did and be successful on your own and not end up in poverty and sleeping on park benches trying to, you know, be independent, here's an avenue for you. I think the information just needs to get back there. And the sucky part is in those inner cities, the Democrats don't want that information to go to those people because they don't want to dig them out of poverty.
Hmm.
They want them to be relegated to perpetual poverty so they can keep political power.
Well, and just to shift now to the race that you're running, talk about establishment entrenchment. The Democrat that currently holds the seat that you're running for, Ohio's ninth congressional district seat, has been in Congress for more than 40 years. Her name is Marcy Kaptur.
Mm.
She has been a Democrat, which Republicans have said is a winnable seat for a really long time, but yet she continues to win these races. And she's been in Washington for what she came in 83, so she's been here for going into her 43rd year. Um, Tell us a little bit about the dynamics that are at play in this race, what folks in your district are talking about heading into the 2026 midterms.
Yeah, I mean, she's been in office longer than I've been alive. Every struggle that I experienced, every struggle that my hometown of Toledo experienced was under her term when she was in Congress. There's not a single thing people can point to that is her market accomplishment since she's been in Congress. She's just been there. She's never held a leadership position. She's never held a committee chairmanship. And if you talk to anyone that's in the know, she doesn't even bring back the type of resources, the type of financial investments into the district that normal members of her senior status, especially ones that serve on appropriations, would typically bring back to their districts. But many people see her as a nice lady, and they keep voting for her because they haven't been given reasonable alternatives. I believe I am that leader that Northwest Ohio needs and deserves. Many of the voters that I talk to on the street, in restaurants, you know, one, they want leadership that they can believe in, but they also want to see members that reflect or can identify with the struggles that they've gone through. So when they hear my backstory, they're not only amazed by what I've overcame, but they get this sense of alignment between them and I because they're going through struggles that they're trying to overcome, and they're trying to have government help them overcome it. And I actually have gone through the same or similar struggles and overcame it. And I've introduced policy in the state of Ohio to help them overcome it. So it's not just lost words. It's not a candidate running for Congress who, yeah, has an interesting backstory and makes some promises about what they're going to do when they get to DC. They can look at my voting record. I mean, right now in the legislature, I checked before I came in today. I have 79 pieces of legislation pending out of my office in the last 11 months. That's a record for any person ever serving in the state legislature in Ohio.
Yeah, if you get up here, you might need to slow that down a little bit. That not.
And I see every day as a blessing, man.
Yeah.
And I'm a problem solver. It's the way my brain works. So when people across the state, they come up with an issue, they're like, hey, you need to go talk to Representative Williams. And I try to find creative solutions to those problems. But you can't say that about my opponent, Marcy Kaptur. I mean, she doesn't solve they want to continue to highlight like affordability is one of the hot button topics for the Democrats' talking points in this election cycle.
It's going to be a hot button topic, but for everybody, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the affordability crisis happened under her watch. You know, when she said she looked forward to working for Joe Biden, when she voted with him almost 100% of the time, when she voted in support of record inflationary numbers, you know, um, the actual legislation that drove inflation crazy across the district. And then even supported ideas of, the EPA giving waivers to California to allow their emission standards to go into play, even though we were not going to be able to sell Jeep products in almost 15 states. And it resulted in 1,800 jobs at my local plant where my brother works. And then soon as Trump got in office and rescinded that and put financial incentives on corporations to bring those jobs back, now we got a $400 million investment in Stellantis where they're putting on a whole new line for a light truck, and she wants to take ownership of that accomplishment, which I find is disrespectful to my district. The policies you supported directly resulted in the loss of jobs, the loss of manufacturing jobs over 40 years. We've lost over 20,000 manufacturing jobs in Toledo during her tenure. We lost over 100,000 residents. And then now she wants to champion the idea that somehow under Republican leadership for the last 11 months, America has become unaffordable, even though we can see the prices are coming down under Donald Trump's leadership. He's got a great agenda for my district, a great agenda for America, and she's in total opposition to that. So I think there's a stark distinction between Marcy Kaptur and I. I'm someone that lived in the district, attended our public schools, raised children that graduated from the public schools, overcame being on the same public subsidies that she continues to try to promote and support. And I've introduced legislation to help people overcome those difficult situations. And I've only been in the legislature for 3 years.
And of course, one of the big things heading into 2026 midterms is if Democrats take control of the House, chances are it'll be an impeachment circus. They will impeach the butler, they will impeach the president, they will impeach the family who took a White House tour. It's kind of like the feeling when you talk to Republicans on Capitol Hill. A big part of that fight over control of the House of Representatives has been redistricting, and that's gone through your state as well. I know I've kept you longer than I said, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about redistricting in Ohio and how that might affect the 2026 midterm results and the last 2 years of the Trump administration.
Oh, first, I want to thank you for even having me on this long. I always love these sit-down interviews. I'm a pretty open book when people talk to me. So I tell my life story and my agenda and my support for the president and the America First agenda with pride. I'm a proud Republican. I'm a pretty proud Black Republican. So we knew we were going into redistricting with an opportunity to follow the voter trends in the state of Ohio. Our maps were 10-5, 10 Republican districts, 5 Democrat districts. We saw the trend of the voters going towards the Republicans. I mean, in my last election cycle, in the portion of the district, the old district that I overlapped Marcy Kaptur, I beat her by 6,600 votes. But yet she only won against the Republican nominee by like 2,800 votes. I outperformed a lot of the Republicans that were on the ticket that year. But now we had a chance to redraw the maps, and the 9th congressional district was the one district that was really redrawn. It went from an R+3 district to an R+9 district. This is a very winnable seat, even in a midterm off year where Democrats typically do better because of voter turnout. We know that we're able to win in our district because we've seen from our voting history that non-traditional Republican voters, that means like in general elections, independents and even soft Democrats and Republicans that didn't vote for the Republican nominee last time, they vote for me. The independents see my vision, see my past, see the future that I want for America, and they vote for me. And even some soft, moderate Democrats see the stark distinction between Marcy Kaptur, who keeps promoting these social engineering, LGBTQ being pushed down our throat, mandatory vaccines, taking the emphasis away from the parent and trying to let the state intervene in how that you raise your children. They don't agree with that. Even if they're a Democrat, they don't agree with that. And they vote our way. But that district got redrawn and it went from, some people believe it went from a 10-5 to a 12-3. I think it's more reasonable that it became
This is the state
of Ohio.
congressional
Yeah.
representation in the House. So 10-5, 10 Republicans, 5 Democrats,
Yeah.
to potentially 12 Republicans, 3 Democrats.
Some people believe it went to a 12-3 map. I personally believe it's an 11-4, around an 11-4 map, with my district being the only one that we're going to be able to pick up. We saw Kevin Coughlin in the 13th withdraw from the race down there against Sykes. So Cincinnati is still one that we think, with a good candidate and right financing and messaging in a good year, if it was a Trump red year, it would flip. But it's going to be interesting to see if we can flip that one as well, especially since we're seeing other states refuse to redistrict. You're seeing, Indiana refuse to redistrict, and you're seeing some other states pick up the charge, like Florida, in an effort to overcome the gerrymandering that's been happening in blue states for decades. But my goal is to win this district. I could win on the last map. I know I can win on this map now that it's shifted 6 points. My goal is to get through the primary and beat Marcy Kaptur, and get in the House of Representatives and be reinforcements for the America First agenda and be able to get some things done. Whether we're in the majority or minority, that's to be seen, but there's a lot of good things that can be done in both situations. But I hope that we're going to be continuing to be in the majority, because I think in order to offset the horrible policies under the Biden Harris administration, those 4 years that led to record inflation, record number of immigrants, public safety concerns, jobs being shipped overseas, investors pulling their money out of America, the crippling effect of those policies, I think it's going to take us probably 8 to 12 years to come up with policies at the federal level to be able to offset that and make sure it never happens again, because we came that close to losing our country.
Well, hopefully we're able to gain it back. Josh Williams, thank you for coming on the Signal Sitdown.
Thank you for having me.
That was awesome, man. Great time.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Signal Sitdown. Before you go, be sure to hit like and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you may be joining us. And please remember to give us a 5-star review. We not only love your feedback, but it really does help the show. Remember, it's your government, and together we'll expose how it really works. See you next time.